"Wrong room, ma'am. Community complaints are down the hall." 11 words. Just 11 words. But the way the patrol officer stretched out the word complaints, dragging it slow, letting it drip with condescension, as if the very concept of grievances was a disease only certain people carried, revealed everything worth knowing about the culture inside this building. The Morrow County Municipal Building's main hearing chamber buzzed with the controlled chaos of a Thursday afternoon public session. Plastic chairs arranged in neat rows, ceiling fans rotating at a pace too slow to matter, fluorescent lights casting their pale glow across floor tiles that had yellowed with decades of foot traffic and institutional neglect. A sign hung beside the entrance, black letters on white background, each word chosen with bureaucratic precision. Morrow County Municipal Building. Public hearing rules. All attendees must remain seated during testimony. Disruptive behavior, subject to removal under Georgia Code Section 161134. Recording devices permitted in designated areas only. The black woman who had just stepped through the doorway did not respond to the officer's comment. She wore a gray cardigan over a simple white blouse, khaki pants, flat shoes with no visible brand. The outfit of someone attending a parent-teacher conference or running weekend errands, not someone preparing to shake the foundations of an entire police department. No badge, no briefcase, no entourage. Just a small notebook with a black leather cover clutched in her right hand. The officer, Sergeant Brock Tillman, according to the nameplate on his chest, stood with his arms crossed, blocking a portion of the aisle. 14 years on the force. Broad shoulders going soft at the edges, stomach beginning to strain against his duty belt, a vein on his forehead that pulsed whenever irritation found him. His eyes tracked her from head to toe. A slow sweep. Deliberate. The kind of assessment a bouncer might give someone trying to enter a club where they clearly did not belong. She walked past him. No collision, no confrontation. Simply moved straight toward the back row of seats, sat down, opened her notebook, and began writing. Blue ink glided across paper in even strokes, unhurried, controlled. Tillman watched. His eyes narrowed to slits. She did not belong here. He knew it. Felt it in his bones. But he did not know, no one in this room knew, that in less than 72 hours, this woman would stand before the entire police department wearing a formal uniform, 4 gold stars on her shoulders, and sign the order suspending him without pay. But before that happened, he would do something that would make the whole department tremble, something that would end up on every news channel in the state, something that would cost him everything. The hearing had not even started yet. The chamber filled gradually over the next 15 minutes. Uniformed officers lined the walls at regular intervals, some genuinely assigned to security duty, others simply present to show departmental solidarity against whatever criticism the public might offer. City council members filtered in through a side door, taking their seats at the elevated platform facing the gallery. Staff members arranged microphones, adjusted name placards, shuffled papers with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this exact routine dozens of times before. Vivian Lockhart, though no one present knew her name yet, continued writing in her notebook. Her pen never left the page for more than a second. Her eyes, however, moved constantly, scanning the room, noting positions, cataloging faces, the emergency exits on both sides of the chamber, the placement of security cameras in each corner, the body language of officers near the doors, the cluster of senior staff gathered near the council platform. 20 years in federal law enforcement had made this kind of assessment automatic, like breathing, like blinking. She did not consciously decide to map the room's tactical layout. Her training simply would not allow her to sit anywhere without knowing every possible route out and every potential threat within. A woman in a captain's uniform entered through the main doors. Black, mid-40s, hair pulled back in a regulation bun, posture rigid with the particular tension of someone who had spent years being the only one of their kind in rooms full of people who looked nothing like them. Captain Lorraine Osei, the sole African-American officer at the command level in the entire Morrow County Police Department, walked past the other officers without greeting any of them, chose a seat in the far left corner of the gallery, and sat alone. Vivian noted this. filed it away. Near the front row, a man in a white command uniform, Deputy Chief Vance, based on the insignia, leaned close to a civilian in an expensive suit. Their conversation was hushed but animated, occasional glances toward the council platform, occasional nods. The civilian's nameplate, visible when he shifted position, read Councilman Reed Davenport. Vivian noted this too. The side door near Tillman's post opened, and a female officer stepped through. Younger than the sergeant, blonde hair pulled into a tight ponytail, the kind of practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. She positioned herself beside Tillman, said something too quiet to hear across the room, and then both of them looked toward the back row, toward Vivian. The female officer, her nameplate read Officer M. Harlow, laughed. Not loud enough to draw official attention, just loud enough to be noticed, just loud enough to send a message. 3 minutes later, as Vivian reviewed her notes, a shadow fell across her lap. She looked up. Officer Harlow stood in the aisle, apparently heading toward the restrooms, but her path had taken her directly past Vivian's seat. As she passed, her arm swung wide, too wide for the narrow space, and knocked Vivian's bag off the adjacent chair. The bag hit the floor with a soft thud. Wallet, phone, car keys scattered across the tiles. Oops! Harlow kept walking without breaking stride. Crowded in here. No apology, no offer to help. Just a single word tossed over her shoulder like spare change. Vivian bent down, gathered her belongings, returned them to the bag, and placed it securely on her lap. Her expression did not change. Her pen returned to the notebook. A new line of text joined the others. Anyone watching might have assumed she was simply cataloging the minor indignity for later complaint. They would have been partially correct. But the notes she was taking went far deeper than personal grievance. She was documenting patterns, behaviors, institutional culture visible in 1,000 small choices. She had come here today specifically to observe, to witness the reality of the department she would soon command, not through official reports filtered through layers of bureaucratic self-protection, not through carefully stage-managed introductions designed to show only the department's best face. She wanted to see what happened when no one important was watching, how officers treated civilians they perceived as powerless, how leadership responded to criticism. Whether the problems she had read about in 18 months of complaint files were isolated incidents or symptoms of something systemic. In less than an hour, she had already gathered more actionable intelligence than 6 months of official briefings had provided. If you're finding this story compelling so far, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens next. The hearing officially began at 2:15 p.m. Councilwoman Patricia Wells, a silver-haired woman in her 60s with the measured demeanor of someone who had survived decades of local politics, called the session to order and read from the prepared agenda. Today's primary business concerned the review of an internal affairs report covering 3 excessive force complaints filed against Morrow County Police Department officers over the previous 18 months. All 3 complaints had been investigated internally. All 3 had been closed with findings of no policy violation. The hearing was intended to allow public comment on those findings before the council voted on whether to accept the report and close the matter permanently. Lieutenant Stowe, head of the Internal Affairs Unit, took the podium first. He was a thin man in his late 40s, the kind of bureaucratic survivor who had mastered the art of saying many words while communicating almost nothing. His presentation lasted 23 minutes. Charts appeared on the projector screen. Statistics filled the air. Jargon accumulated like snowfall. The core message, stripped of its protective layers, the complaints were investigated thoroughly, the officers involved followed proper procedure, and no disciplinary action was warranted. In conclusion, Stowe said, adjusting his reading glasses, the Internal Affairs Division finds that all 3 complaints lack factual substantiation. The officers in question acted within department policy guidelines at all times. We recommend these cases be closed with no further action required. Councilwoman Wells thanked him for his presentation. Councilman Davenport nodded approvingly. Deputy Chief Vance, watching from the front row, allowed himself a small smile. Captain Osei, alone in her corner, stared at the floor. Vivian wrote 3 words in her notebook, underlined twice. The public comment period opened at 3:20 p.m. A microphone had been set up in the center aisle, and citizens were invited to approach one at a time to offer questions or statements. A 2-minute limit per speaker was announced. A timer would be displayed on the screen. The first speaker was a middle-aged white man who complained about speeding cars in his neighborhood. The second was an elderly woman concerned about response times for welfare checks. The third was a young man who asked whether the department planned to expand its community policing program. None of them addressed the actual topic of the hearing. None of them challenged the internal affairs findings. The council members listened politely, offered vague assurances, and watched the clock. Tillman, still stationed near the main entrance, had relaxed into a casual lean against the wall. His arms remained crossed, but the tension in his shoulders had eased. This was going exactly as expected. Rubber stamp. Token public input. Case closed. He would be off duty in 2 hours, home in time for dinner, and this entire exercise in bureaucratic theater would fade into the unremarkable rhythm of departmental routine. Then the woman from the back row stood up. She moved down the center aisle with a measured pace, not rushed, not hesitant, confident without being aggressive, the kind of walk that suggested she had approached microphones before, many times, in rooms far more consequential than this one. Tillman straightened slightly. His eyes tracked her movement. She reached the microphone, adjusted it to her height with a practiced twist, and waited for Councilwoman Wells to acknowledge her. "You have 2 minutes, ma'am. Please state your name for the record." "Vivian Lockhart, Morrow County resident." Her voice carried clearly without effort. No strain, no performance. Simple projection from someone accustomed to being heard. "I have a question about procedure." She opened her notebook, though her eyes remained on the council platform rather than the page. The Internal Affairs report states that all 3 complaints were investigated within the 30-day window required by department policy. However, FOIA records obtained through the Georgia Open Records Act show that 2 of the 3 complainants were never contacted for follow-up interviews during the investigation period. Additionally, the 3rd complainant's interview was conducted by phone rather than in person, which contradicts Section 4.7 of the department's own IA Procedures Manual. She paused. Let the silence gather weight. "Can Lieutenant Stowe clarify this discrepancy?" The room's atmosphere shifted. Not dramatically. The fluorescent lights still hummed, the ceiling fans still rotated, the plastic chairs still creaked with small movements. But something had changed in the quality of attention. Council members who had been checking phones now looked up. Officers along the walls exchanged glances. Deputy Chief Vance's small smile disappeared. Lieutenant Stowe cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses again, looked toward Vance as if seeking guidance. "Ma'am, the investigation procedures are complex. There are situations where phone interviews are deemed sufficient based on the nature of the complaint and the availability of the complainant. Each case is evaluated individually. I understand that procedures can vary." Vivian's tone remained level. "But the department's own manual states, and I'm quoting Section 4.7 directly, all complainants shall be offered the opportunity for an in-person interview within 15 business days of complaint filing. The word shall is mandatory language. It doesn't allow for discretionary substitution of phone interviews without documented justification. I've reviewed the FOIA materials thoroughly. No such documentation appears in any of the 3 case files." Stowe's forehead glistened under the fluorescent lights. He opened his mouth to respond, but Deputy Chief Vance rose from his seat and approached the podium, positioning himself beside the lieutenant with the ease of someone accustomed to taking charge. "Ma'am?" Vance's voice carried the particular smoothness of long practice. "This is a public comment session, not a deposition. If you have specific concerns about departmental procedures, you're welcome to file a formal inquiry through the appropriate channels. The Internal Affairs Division would be happy to address your questions in writing. I'm asking a procedural question based on publicly available documents. Vivian did not raise her voice, did not need to. That seems appropriate for a public hearing about those same procedures. And I'm explaining that the appropriate venue for that level of detail is a formal written inquiry, not a 2-minute public comment period. Councilman Davenport stood, his chair scraping against the platform floor. Chair, if I may, we have a schedule to keep. Perhaps we could move on to the next speaker. Councilwoman Wells hesitated. Her eyes moved from Davenport to Vance to the woman at the microphone. A calculation was visible in her expression, the weighing of political considerations against procedural fairness. Thank you for your comments, Ms. Lockhart. Your concerns are noted for the record. Next speaker, please. Vivian closed her notebook, stepped away from the microphone, returned to her seat in the back row with the same measured pace. She had not gotten answers, had not expected to, but she had accomplished exactly what she intended, observed how the department's leadership responded to substantive challenge, documented their deflection techniques, identified which council members would support accountability measures and which would protect the status quo. And she had noticed something else, something smaller but potentially significant. Captain Osei, in her corner seat, had been holding her phone at chest level throughout the exchange. The angle suggested she might have been recording. The slight nod she gave when Vivian sat down suggested solidarity, carefully disguised, plausibly deniable, but present. Vivian made a note. The hearing concluded at 4:45 p.m. with a unanimous council vote to accept the internal affairs report and close all 3 cases. No disciplinary action, no policy changes, no acknowledgement that anything worth examining had occurred. Business as usual. The chamber began emptying in the particular way public meetings always do, officials disappearing through side doors first, then staff, then the handful of citizens who had come to observe or testify. Vivian remained seated, taking final notes, watching the room drain of people and energy until only scattered clusters remained. She gathered her things slowly, deliberately, allowing time for the crowds to thin, for the officers to relax their attention, for whatever might happen next to reveal itself. It did not take long. She was 3 steps into the main hallway when Sergeant Tillman materialized in front of her. He had not been there a moment before, must have circled through a side corridor to position himself in her path. His arms were crossed again, his jaw set tight. The vein on his forehead pulsed with visible rhythm. You got a lot of questions for someone who doesn't work here. His voice was different now, harder. The professional veneer from before had cracked. Something uglier showed through the gaps. Vivian stopped, maintained an appropriate distance, let her arms hang loose at her sides. Public hearing. Her tone matched his in flatness. Public questions. You a lawyer? Reporter? Concerned citizen. Tillman stepped closer. 1 foot, then another. The gap between them narrowed to something uncomfortable, something that violated the unwritten rules of personal space, something designed to intimidate. Let me give you some advice. His voice dropped, not to a whisper, to something worse, a quiet that demanded attention. People who ask too many questions in this town, they find out some answers aren't worth knowing. Is that a threat, Sergeant? That's friendly advice, free of charge. His hand came up, landed on her shoulder, fingers pressing through the fabric of her cardigan. Not a shove, not quite, but contact, intentional, aggressive, the kind of touch that existed in the gray zone between discourtesy and assault. Some things in this county work a certain way, have for a long time. Smart people learn to accept that. The ones who don't. He let the sentence hang unfinished, let his hand remain on her shoulder a beat too long. Remove your hand. 3 words, spoken without volume, without visible emotion, but something in her voice, some quality of absolute certainty, made Tillman's fingers twitch, made him withdraw 1/2 inch before he caught himself. Or what? Vivian's eyes met his, held, did not waver. "Remove your hand. I won't ask again." For a moment, something flickered in Tillman's expression. Uncertainty. The primal recognition that he might have miscalculated. That this woman was not what she appeared to be. That the cardigan and khakis concealed something he had failed to account for. Then the moment passed. His hand dropped. His sneer returned. Whatever. He stepped aside, creating space for her to pass. "Just remember what I said." Friendly advice. Vivian walked past him without another word. Her pace did not quicken. Her shoulders did not tense. She moved through the hallway toward the exit with the same measured confidence she had shown all afternoon. But she was not unaware. She knew, could feel, eyes following her movement. Tillman's gaze burning into her back. Other officers stationed along the corridor watching the exchange with expressions that ranged from curiosity to amusement to something darker. She knew something else too, something that Tillman certainly did not notice. Captain Osei stood at the far end of the hallway, phone raised to chest level, camera pointed directly at the encounter that had just occurred. Georgia Code Section 16-523 defines simple battery as intentionally making physical contact of an insulting or provoking nature with another person. The statute does not require injury, does not require force sufficient to cause pain. Only contact, unwanted, uninvited, intended to demean or intimidate. Sergeant Brock Tillman had just crossed that line, on camera, in a public building, with a woman whose true identity he had not bothered to discover. The dominoes were beginning to fall. He just did not know it yet. The next morning dawned gray over Morrow County. September in Georgia meant humidity that clung to everything, air thick enough to taste, and skies that threatened rain without committing to it. Vivian had slept poorly, not from distress, but from the particular alertness that always accompanied the beginning of a significant operation. Her body understood, even when her conscious mind tried to rest, that events were in motion, that the next several days would determine the trajectory of her new position. She stood at the window of her rental apartment, temporary housing until the permanent chief's residence became available, and watched the morning traffic crawl along Peachtree Boulevard. 4 days left until her official swearing-in ceremony. 4 days of anonymity. 4 days to gather information that would never be available once everyone knew who she was. Her phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. "Saw what happened yesterday. Not the first time with Tillman. Have documentation. Contact if interested. A friend." No name, no identifying information, just an offer. Vivian saved the number but did not respond. Not yet. Too early to know who to trust, whose motivations aligned with accountability versus whose concealed personal agendas. She had spent 20 years learning that the most dangerous enemies often came disguised as allies, and the most valuable allies often appeared, at first, indistinguishable from enemies. Instead, she opened her laptop and began composing a FOIA request to the Morrow County Records Division. Specific focus: all citizen complaints filed against Sergeant Brock Tillman over the past 5 years. Response required within 3 business days under Georgia Code Section 50:18-71. She would see what the official record contained. Then she would decide what to do about the unofficial offer. The morning passed in documentation. Notes from yesterday's hearing organized into categories. Observations coded by relevance. Names entered into a spreadsheet that would eventually become the foundation for her first command briefing. By noon, she had created preliminary profiles on 17 department employees, their rank, tenure, public complaints, disciplinary history accessible through records requests, and observed behavior during the hearing. 3 names appeared on a separate list, a shorter list. Officers whose conduct warranted immediate attention upon her assumption of command. Sergeant Brock Tillman was at the top. At 12:30 p.m., she drove back to the municipal building. Not for another hearing. The next public session was not scheduled until Monday, after her swearing in. She was there for something simpler. to collect the FOIA documents she had requested the previous week. The request had been filed before her arrival in town, using her personal email rather than any official channel, asking for general statistics on excessive force complaints over the past 3 years. The statutory deadline for response had been yesterday. The records office occupied a small suite on the building's second floor. Linoleum tile worn thin in traffic patterns. Filing cabinets lining every wall. A single window that looked out onto the parking structure. A clerk sat behind the counter, young, male, clearly bored, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. "Help you?" "Vivian Lockhart, I'm here to pick up a FOIA response, request number 2024-09478. The clerk typed something into his computer, frowned, typed again. The frown deepened. Looks like your request is still being processed. The statutory deadline was yesterday. Georgia Code Section 50-1871 requires response within 3 business days of request receipt." The clerk's eyes widened slightly. Most people who came to this window did not quote statute numbers. Most people accepted whatever explanation they were given and went away quietly. "I understand, ma'am, but there's a note here in the system." He squinted at his screen. "Pending departmental review. I don't have the authority to override that hold. You'd need to speak with the department's records liaison." "And who would that be?" "Lieutenant Stowe, Internal Affairs." Of course it was. Vivian did not argue, did not raise her voice, did not threaten legal action, though she certainly could have. Instead, she simply nodded, made a note in her ever-present notebook, and asked for a printed copy of the denial screen showing the hold status and its timestamp. The clerk hesitated, looked uncomfortable, but ultimately complied. The request was reasonable, and he lacked the authority or inclination to refuse. "Thanks." She folded the printout, placed it in her bag, and left. Another piece of documentation. Another brick in the wall she was building. By the time she took official command, she would have enough evidence of systemic dysfunction to justify an immediate leadership restructuring. Not speculation, not theory, documented facts. The kind of evidence that held up to scrutiny, that could not be dismissed as the complaints of a newcomer unfamiliar with local conditions. 20 years in the FBI had taught her that institutions rarely changed from goodwill alone. They changed when the cost of maintaining the status quo became higher than the cost of reform. Her job, over the next 72 hours, was to ensure that calculation became unavoidable. This story is just getting started. If you're invested in seeing justice served, drop a like and share this with someone who needs to hear it. The afternoon brought an unexpected development. Vivian had returned to her apartment to review the morning's documentation when her phone rang. Unknown number again, but different from the morning's text message. She answered with caution. "Ms. Lockhart?" A male voice, professional, clipped. "This is Lieutenant Stowe, Internal Affairs Division. We've received a complaint about your conduct at yesterday's public hearing." Vivian settled into her desk chair, kept her voice neutral. "What complaint?" "Disrupting a public proceeding, harassing department personnel. The complainant describes repeated provocative behavior intended to interfere with official business." "I asked procedural questions during the public comment period. That's literally what the comment period exists for." "The manner of your questioning has been characterized as aggressive and inappropriate. We'd like you to come in for a formal interview to discuss the incident." "Under what authority?" A pause. The sound of papers shuffling. "This is a courtesy call, ma'am. We're trying to handle this informally. But if you prefer the formal route, we can certainly arrange that. We have considerable latitude in how we pursue these matters." The implied threat was clear. Cooperate quietly, or face escalating consequences. Vivian had dealt with intimidation tactics far more sophisticated than this. Organized crime figures who had threatened her family, foreign intelligence operatives who had attempted to compromise her operations, politicians who had tried to pressure the Bureau into dropping investigations. A small-town IA lieutenant attempting to silence a civilian witness did not even register on the scale of threats she had navigated. "Lieutenant, I'm going to decline your invitation. I have not engaged in any conduct that violates any law or regulation, and I have no obligation to participate in an interview without legal representation. If you believe you have grounds for formal action, you're welcome to pursue it through proper channels. In the meantime, please note that recording this conversation without my consent would violate Georgia's wiretapping statutes. Have a good afternoon." She disconnected before he could respond. The phone rang again immediately. She declined the call. It rang a third time. Declined again. Then silence. Vivian looked at the device for a long moment. Then she opened her laptop and began drafting an email to the district attorney's office, documenting the call, the implied threats, and the broader pattern of what appeared to be coordinated retaliation against a citizen who had raised procedural concerns about department conduct. She did not send it yet. Too early. But the draft would be ready when the time came. That evening, as the sun began its descent toward the Georgia pines, Vivian received another text message. Different number than either of the previous contacts. Check the Morrow County Register website, comments section on the Tillman article. She opened her browser. The Register was the county's primary newspaper. Small circulation, limited resources, but occasionally capable of genuine investigative journalism. The front page featured a brief article about the previous day's hearing, standard coverage of a routine municipal meeting. But the comments section told a different story. Among the usual noise of local politics and anonymous grievance, one comment stood out, posted by a user identified only as MCPD Insider, time-stamped 4 hours ago. Tillman has 11 complaints in 5 years, 9 involving black motorists, all closed unfounded by IA. Ask why his body cam footage keeps having technical malfunctions during traffic stops. Ask about the Martinez stop from last month. Ask where those 7 minutes went. The comment had already been flagged for removal. By morning, it would probably be gone. Vivian took a screenshot, added it to her growing file. Someone inside the department wanted the truth to come out. Someone was taking risks to ensure she had the information she needed. The question was whether that someone could be trusted, or whether this was an elaborate trap designed to discredit her before she even took office. Either way, she now had specific direction for her next FOIA request. Body cam footage from Sergeant Tillman's traffic stops over the past 12 months, with particular attention to any documented technical malfunctions. The walls were beginning to close. Tillman just did not know it yet. Friday morning, 2 days before the swearing-in ceremony, the Morrow County Police Department headquarters occupied a 3-story building on the edge of downtown, its architecture an uncomfortable marriage of 1970s brutalism and budget-conscious renovation. Vivian had no official business there, not yet, but she needed to see it, needed to understand the physical space she would soon command. She parked across the street in a public lot serving a strip mall and observed. Officers coming and going. Shift changes at 7 a.m. and 3 p.m. Civilian staff entering through a side door that required badge access. Command vehicles in reserved spots near the main entrance. A steady flow of patrol cars cycling through the back lot. Normal operations. Routine rhythms. Nothing overtly concerning. But details emerged upon closer attention. The way certain officers clustered in groups, their body language suggesting cliques rather than professional collegiality. The way black officers, she counted 3 entering or leaving during her 2-hour observation, consistently walked alone, separate from their white colleagues. The way a civilian complaint window on the building's west side remained unstaffed during the posted public hours. Small things. Individually meaningless. Collectively, a portrait. At 9:45 a.m., Deputy Chief Vance emerged from the main entrance, accompanied by 2 men she did not recognize. They walked to a black SUV with municipal plates, spoke briefly in the parking lot, then drove away together. Vivian noted the license plate number, the timestamp, the direction of travel. Not that she planned to follow. That would cross lines she was not prepared to cross while still a private citizen. But the information might prove useful later. Patterns often revealed themselves through accumulated details. At 10:15 a.m., her phone buzzed. Text from the first unknown contact, the one who had mentioned documentation. He's going to try again, today or tomorrow. Stay visible. Have witnesses. No elaboration, no identification. Vivian considered the message. Try again could mean many things. Another intimidation attempt. Another physical confrontation. Something worse. She decided to take the advice at face value. Whatever happened next, it would happen in public, with witnesses, with documentation. She drove to the municipal building. The records office was more crowded than yesterday. 3 people waited in line ahead of her. She joined the queue, pulled out her notebook, and began reviewing her notes from the morning's observation. The line moved slowly. Government pace. By the time she reached the counter, nearly 30 minutes had passed. A different clerk today, female, older. The particular weariness of someone who had processed too many requests to count. Help you? Vivian Lockhart. I'd like to file a new FOIA request. She submitted the form she had prepared the night before. Body cam footage, specific officer, specific date range, proper statutory citations. The clerk reviewed it. Her eyebrows rose slightly. The request was detailed, technically precise, the work of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. This will take some time to process. Body cam footage requires review for exemptions before release. I understand. The statute allows for redaction of legitimately exempt material. I'm specifically requesting non-exempt footage with appropriate redactions applied. The clerk nodded, made notes, provided a receipt with a tracking number. You'll be notified when the response is ready. Vivian took the receipt, thanked the clerk, and turned to leave. Sergeant Tillman was standing in the doorway. He wore civilian clothes today. Jeans, polo shirt, department windbreaker. Off duty, apparently, but present in the building nonetheless. His arms were crossed. That seemed to be his default posture. His eyes tracked her movement from the counter toward the exit. Following up on your little project? She stopped, maintained distance. Let the public setting speak for itself. Exercising my rights under the Georgia Open Records Act. Is there a problem? No problem. Just curious what a concerned citizen needs with body cam footage. The statute doesn't require me to explain my reasons, but since you asked, I'm interested in ensuring accountability in public institutions. Body cam footage is a useful tool for that purpose. Tillman's jaw tightened. The vein on his forehead made its appearance. You know what I think? I think you're one of those outside agitators we keep hearing about. Come into a town you know nothing about. Stir up trouble based on assumptions and bias. Try to make good officers look bad because it fits your agenda. I've made no accusations against anyone. I've asked procedural questions and filed public records requests. If that constitutes agitation in your view, that seems like a problem with the view rather than the actions. She moved toward the door. He did not step aside. Excuse me. In a minute. I want to make sure we understand each other. He leaned closer, not touching. The memory of yesterday's confrontation apparently fresh enough to impose some caution. Whatever you're looking for, you're not going to find it. This department protects its own. Always has. Always will. And outsiders who try to interfere with that, they learn some hard lessons about how things work around here. Is that another threat, Sergeant? That's reality. Free education. Take it or leave it. Behind her, the clerk watched the exchange with undisguised alarm. Other citizens in the office had stopped their business to observe. Phones were out. Recording, probably. Good. Thank you for the education, Sergeant. I'll be sure to include it in my notes. She stepped around him. This time he let her pass, but she felt his eyes on her all the way to the elevator. Felt the weight of his attention pressing against her back like a physical thing. Felt the particular danger of a man who was not accustomed to being challenged and did not know how to process it except through escalation. The confrontation was coming. She could feel it gathering like storm clouds on the horizon. The only question was when and where. She intended to be ready. Saturday. September 21st, the day everything changed. Vivian learned about the emergency hearing from the morning news. Councilwoman Wells had called a special session, unusual for a weekend, but apparently justified by developing circumstances related to police oversight matters. The session would begin at 10 a.m. Public attendance was permitted. She did not know what had prompted the sudden meeting. Perhaps the Register article had generated enough public attention to force additional discussion. Perhaps internal pressure within the council had reached a tipping point. Perhaps something else entirely had occurred behind closed doors. Regardless, she would be there. One final observation before assuming command. One final opportunity to see the department's leadership under pressure. She dressed simply again. Gray slacks, navy blouse, the same flat shoes. No distinguishing features. No badges or credentials. Just another concerned citizen attending a public meeting. The municipal building's hearing chamber was more crowded than Thursday's session. Word had spread, through social media, through the Register's coverage, through the particular gravity that accompanies controversy in small communities. Every seat was occupied. People lined the walls. The atmosphere crackled with the tension of anticipated confrontation. Vivian took a seat in the second row from the front. Not hiding in the back this time, visible, present. If something was going to happen, she wanted to be in a position to respond. Captain Osei sat 3 seats to her left. Their eyes met briefly. A small nod exchanged. Nothing more. Deputy Chief Vance occupied the front row, directly behind the council platform, surrounded by other command staff. His expression was controlled but tight, the look of someone managing a situation that had slipped partially beyond his control. Tillman was present as well, off duty again, in civilian clothes, but stationed near the main entrance with 2 other officers. Security, presumably, or intimidation. The line between the two often blurred. Officer Harlow stood beside him. Same ponytail, same smile that never reached her eyes. Councilwoman Wells called the session to order at precisely 10 a.m. Her voice carried the particular weariness of someone who had spent the last 48 hours fielding phone calls, managing competing pressures, and trying to navigate political currents she had not anticipated. This special session has been called to address concerns raised during Thursday's public hearing regarding internal affairs procedures. We have received multiple inquiries from citizens and media requesting clarification on several points. In the interest of transparency, we've invited Lieutenant Stowe to provide additional detail on the investigation process. Stowe took the podium again. Same reading glasses, same air of bureaucratic defensiveness. But something in his posture had changed, a rigidity that suggested he was operating under orders rather than speaking with confidence. His presentation covered much of the same ground as Thursday: procedural compliance, thorough investigation, no findings of misconduct. But this time, he included additional detail, almost certainly in response to Vivian's questions 2 days earlier. The department's investigation manual does allow for modified interview procedures under certain circumstances, he explained, reading from prepared notes. Section 4.7 subsection C permits phone interviews when in-person meetings would create undue hardship for the complainant or when scheduling conflicts prevent timely face-to-face contact. All 3 cases in question were handled consistently with these provisions. A convenient interpretation. Vivian wondered if the subsection he cited had existed before Thursday, or if it had been hastily inserted into the manual over the past 48 hours. The public comment period opened at 10:40 a.m. A longer queue formed at the microphone this time. Citizens emboldened by Thursday's exchange. Reporters looking for quotable moments. Activists who had traveled from neighboring counties. The first 3 speakers were critical of the department. They cited statistics, named officers with multiple complaints, demanded independent oversight. Each received the same response from Councilman Davenport. The council appreciated their input, but trusted the department's internal processes. The 4th speaker was a former officer, retired, he said, after 22 years. He defended his colleagues vigorously, described the difficulty of the job, complained about Monday morning quarterbacks who had never worn a badge. He received applause from the officers lined along the walls. The fifth speaker was a young black woman, a college student, based on her demeanor. Her voice shook as she described being pulled over by Morrow County officers 3 times in 2 months, always for reasons that proved unfounded, always with escalating aggression, always ending with no ticket and no explanation. She named no names, filed no formal complaint, just wanted someone to know. Councilwoman Wells thanked her for her courage. No council member offered any response beyond that. Vivian waited. When the queue thinned to its final speakers, she stood, made her way to the microphone, took her position as she had 2 days before. The room tensed. Everyone who had been present Thursday recognized her. The woman who had rattled Lieutenant Stowe. The woman who had prompted this entire emergency session. Ms. Lockhart, Councilwoman Wells's voice carried a note of resignation. You have 2 minutes. Thank you, Councilwoman. I'll be brief. She opened her notebook, consulted her notes, not because she needed to, but because the pause created space. Drew attention. Since Thursday's hearing, I've obtained additional documentation through public records requests. A comment posted anonymously on the Morrow County Register website, since removed, alleged that Sergeant Brock Tillman has accumulated 11 citizen complaints over the past 5 years, 9 involving black motorists, all closed by internal affairs as unfounded. Movement along the walls, officers shifting position, Tillman's face reddening visibly even from 30 feet away. I cannot verify that specific claim through official channels because my FOIA request for related records remains pending departmental review despite statutory deadlines having passed. However, I can note that the pattern alleged, if accurate, would represent precisely the kind of systemic concern that independent oversight is designed to address. Councilman Davenport stood. Chair, this is inappropriate. The speaker is making accusations based on anonymous internet comments. This is exactly the kind of reckless speculation that undermines public trust in our institutions. I made no accusations. Vivian's voice remained level. I stated that allegations exist, that I cannot verify them through normal channels due to delays in records compliance, and that the pattern described, if accurate, would warrant concern. I am asking this council whether independent verification mechanisms exist, and if not, whether the council intends to create them. The department has internal processes that have produced the results we've seen. Every complaint closed unfounded, every officer cleared, every investigation conducted by colleagues of the accused. She turned slightly, addressing the full room now, rather than just the council. I'm not suggesting wrongdoing occurred. I'm asking whether the current structure is designed to detect wrongdoing if it did occur. Those are different questions. Deputy Chief Vance rose from his seat. Chair, if I may respond. Councilwoman Wells hesitated, then nodded. Vance approached the podium, positioned himself beside Stowe. The physical message clear: unified command, institutional solidarity. I understand that outside observers sometimes question processes they don't fully understand. His tone carried practiced smoothness. The Internal Affairs Division operates under strict protocols, with multiple layers of review documented at every stage. The suggestion that our investigations are compromised by collegial relationships is not only inaccurate, it's insulting to the dedicated professionals who work every day to ensure accountability. Then you'll have no objection to independent verification. We have no objection to appropriate oversight conducted through appropriate channels. But vigilante investigations based on anonymous tips and agenda-driven speculation are not appropriate oversight. They're harassment. The word landed heavy in the room. Harassment. An accusation with legal weight. I have harassed no one. Vivian's voice did not waver. I have attended public meetings, asked public questions, filed public records requests. If those actions constitute harassment, in the department's view, that characterization itself warrants independent review. Captain Osei, alone in her corner, as always, shifted in her seat. Her phone was out, screen angled toward the exchange. "Chair?" Councilman Davenport's voice cut through the tension. "Can we please restore order and move on? Ms. Lockhart has exceeded her time by nearly a minute. We have other business to address." Councilwoman Wells nodded. "Thank you, Ms. Lockhart. Your comments are noted. Please yield the microphone." Vivian closed her notebook, stepped back from the microphone, began returning to her seat. She was halfway down the aisle when Tillman moved. He had been standing near the main entrance, arms crossed in his perpetual posture of controlled aggression. But something in the exchange had broken his restraint. The public mention of his complaint history, the implication that his record warranted scrutiny, the humiliation of having his name spoken aloud in a room full of citizens and media. He pushed off from the wall, crossed the distance in long strides, intercepted her before she reached the second row. "You just don't know when to quit, do you?" His voice was loud, intended to be heard. The room's attention snapped toward them like iron filings toward a magnet. "You come into our town, ask your questions, make your accusations, think you can just walk away like nothing happened." "I've made no accusations against you specifically, Sergeant. I reported publicly available allegations and asked for independent verification. If those allegations are false, verification would exonerate you." "Exonerate me?" He laughed, a harsh sound, brittle with anger. "I don't need exoneration from people like you. I've got 14 years of service. Commendations. My record speaks for itself." "Then let your record speak. Allow independent review. If you're confident in your conduct, transparency should be welcome." "Transparency." He spat the word. "That's all you people ever want. Cameras, oversight, second-guessing. You've never done this job, never worn this badge, never put your life on the line. But you think you have the right to judge. I think citizens have the right to expect accountability from public servants. That's not judgment. That's democracy." The vein on his forehead pulsed violently. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. The officers along the walls watched, some concerned, some excited, none moving to intervene. Deputy Chief Vance half rose from his seat. "Sergeant Tillman." Too late. The hand came fast, open palm, full swing. The crack of impact echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. Vivian's head snapped to the side. Her body swayed but did not fall. Her hand rose slowly to her cheek, already reddening, already swelling, and touched the point of impact with clinical detachment. Absolute silence for 2 heartbeats, 3, 4, then chaos. Court security officers, civilian employees, not police, rushed forward, tackling Tillman before he could swing again. His arms were wrenched behind his back. Handcuffs appeared. His shouts of "outside agitator" and "setup" echoed off the walls as he was dragged toward the exit. Cameras everywhere, phones raised in every direction. The mechanical clicking of professional photographers who had been expecting nothing more interesting than bureaucratic testimony. Councilwoman Wells stood frozen at her podium. Councilman Davenport's face had gone pale. Deputy Chief Vance looked like a man watching his career collapse in real time. Captain Osei stood too, her phone lowered slowly. She had captured everything. Vivian remained standing in the aisle, her hand still pressed against her cheek, her expression unreadable. A court security supervisor approached. Middle-aged woman, badge identifying her as Chief of Municipal Security. "Ma'am, do you need medical attention? We can call EMT." "No, thank you, I'm fine." "We need to take your statement. The police officer who struck you is being detained pending charges." "I understand. I'll cooperate fully." She allowed herself to be guided toward a side room, away from the cameras, away from the shouting, away from the pandemonium that had engulfed the hearing chamber. But before she left, she turned back, looked across the room at the chaos she had not created but had certainly catalyzed, at the officers who now avoided her gaze, at the council members who had dismissed her concerns minutes before they proved justified, at the deputy chief who had called her questions harassment. 1 day left until the swearing-in ceremony. one day until they all learned who she really was. The footage was already spreading. Before Vivian reached the side room for her statement, cell phone videos of the assault had appeared on 3 local news websites. Within an hour, they would reach regional outlets. By evening, national networks would be calling Morrow County for comment. A police sergeant striking an unarmed civilian woman in the middle of a public hearing. No ambiguity, no alternate interpretation, just brutal, documented, indefensible violence. The district attorney, Monica Tran, arrived at the municipal building within 40 minutes. She was a compact woman in her 50s, Vietnamese American, hair streaked with gray, eyes sharp with the particular intelligence of someone who had spent decades navigating systems designed to exclude her. She found Vivian in the security office, ice pack pressed against her swollen cheek, calmly answering questions from a court security investigator. "Ms. Lockhart." D.A. Tran dismissed the investigator with a glance, took a seat across from Vivian. Let silence gather before speaking. "I'd like to take your statement personally, if you're willing, given the circumstances." "Of course." The statement took 30 minutes. Vivian provided precise detail. Timestamps, positions, exact words exchanged. Her recall was extraordinary, photographic almost, the kind of memory that came from years of testifying in federal court, years of knowing that every detail might matter. When she finished, D.A. Tran studied her for a long moment. "Ms. Lockhart, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." "Of course." "Your questions at these hearings, your FOIA requests, your preparation. You're not just a concerned citizen, are you?" Vivian held the DA's gaze, made a decision. "No, I'm not." "Who are you?" "My full legal name is Vivian Ann Lockhart. Until 3 weeks ago, I served as Deputy Director of the FBI Philadelphia Field Office. 20 years in federal law enforcement. Counterterrorism. Organized crime. Public corruption. I was appointed Chief of Police of Morrow County by the City Council in closed session on September 14th. The announcement was made publicly on September 15th. My swearing-in ceremony is scheduled for Monday at 9 a.m. D.A. Tran's expression did not change, but something shifted behind her eyes. A recalculation. A reordering of assumptions. "You're the new chief." "I will be, in approximately 40 hours. "And you attended these hearings. Why?" "To observe. To understand the department I'm about to command. To see how officers behave when they don't know anyone important is watching." Silence stretched between them. The ice pack dripped condensation onto the table. "Well," D.A. Tran's voice carried a new quality now, something between respect and alarm. "This changes things considerably." "Yes, it does." The investigation that followed moved with unusual speed. D.A. Tran, recognizing the explosive implications of the case, immediately contacted the FBI Atlanta field office. A federal civil rights violation, assault by a law enforcement officer against a civilian, captured on multiple recordings, potentially fell under federal jurisdiction regardless of Vivian's impending position. By evening, Sergeant Brock Tillman had been formally charged with simple battery under Georgia Code Section 16-523. Federal charges under 18 U.S.C. Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law, were under consideration pending review by the U.S. Attorney's Office. He remained in custody, bail hearing scheduled for Sunday morning. The Morrow County Police Department issued a terse statement. The department is aware of the incident at today's public hearing. Sergeant Tillman has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. We have no further comment at this time. No mention of Vivian's identity. Not yet. That revelation was being carefully managed. Captain Osei provided her video footage to the DA's office within hours of the incident. The recording was clear, damning, and comprehensive, capturing not only the assault itself, but the preceding confrontation in its entirety. Tillman's threats, his aggressive approach, the complete absence of provocation on Vivian's part. Additional footage emerged as investigators canvassed the hearing chamber. municipal security cameras, cell phone recordings from at least a dozen attendees, a professional photographer working for the register who had captured the exact moment of impact in crystalline detail. The evidence was overwhelming. There would be no conflicting accounts, no isolated perspective, no room for the usual defenses that protected officers in ambiguous situations. This was different. This was undeniable. And it was about to become a national story. You've made it this far. That tells me you understand why stories like this matter. If you haven't already, hit that like button and share this with someone who needs to hear the ending. Trust me, you won't believe what happens on Monday. Sunday passed in controlled chaos. Vivian spent most of it in meetings, with DA Tran, with the FBI field office, with Councilwoman Wells, who had aged visibly over 48 hours, with legal counsel reviewing the implications of the assault on her impending command. The central question was whether to proceed with Monday's swearing-in ceremony as scheduled. Some advisors argued for delay, let the immediate controversy settle, avoid the appearance of taking command while simultaneously serving as victim and witness in a criminal investigation against a department employee. Others argued the opposite. Any delay would suggest weakness, would allow the department's internal factions to regroup, would signal that violence against civilian oversight could successfully derail accountability. Vivian listened to all perspectives, made her decision by Sunday evening. The ceremony would proceed as scheduled. She would take command of the department whose officer had assaulted her. She would do it publicly, visibly, with full media attention. She would make clear that violence against accountability was not merely ineffective. It was counterproductive. That the assault had not weakened her position, but strengthened it. That every officer in the department was now on notice. This was the woman they had tried to intimidate, and she was now their commanding officer. It was a risk. There were legitimate concerns about conflicts of interest, about the perception of personal vendetta coloring professional decisions, about whether she could credibly lead officers who had witnessed one of their colleagues attack her. But Vivian had spent 20 years navigating hostile institutional environments, had faced threats far more sophisticated than a sergeant's temper tantrum, had built a career on demonstrating that competence and integrity could overcome prejudice and resistance. This would be her first test as chief of police, and she intended to pass it. Monday morning, September 23rd, 9 a.m. The hearing chamber, the same room where Vivian had been struck 48 hours earlier, had been transformed. Rows of chairs now faced a temporary stage. American and Georgia state flags flanked a podium. A small orchestra of cameras, local, regional, national, lined the back wall. Every seat was occupied. Standing room only. The audience included council members, department command staff, civilian employees, representatives from the district attorney and U.S. attorney offices, journalists, and a significant contingent of community members who had heard about Saturday's incident and come to witness what happened next. Deputy Chief Vance sat in the front row. His expression was stone. He had been forced to attend by protocol. The outgoing acting commander traditionally witnessed the swearing-in of the new chief. But every line of his body radiated resistance. Captain Osei sat several rows back. Her uniform was immaculate, her posture straight. For the first time in Vivian's observation, she did not sit alone. 2 other officers had positioned themselves on either side of her. A small but significant gesture of solidarity. Tillman was absent. Released on $15,000 bail the previous day, he had been ordered to avoid all department facilities and public gatherings until his case was resolved. His presence would have violated those terms. At 8:55 a.m., a side door opened. Vivian Lockhart stepped into the chamber. The silence was absolute. Every face turned toward her. Every eye tracked her movement. She wore the formal uniform of the chief of police, navy blue, pressed to razor sharpness, 4 gold stars gleaming on each shoulder. Her badge, the chief's badge with its distinctive eagle and crossed rifles, sat over her heart. Her nameplate, V. Lockhart, was positioned precisely according to regulation. But it was her face that commanded attention. The left cheek still bore visible swelling. Makeup could not fully conceal the bruise that had developed overnight, a purple-yellow shadow spreading from cheekbone to jaw. She had chosen not to hide it, the physical evidence of what had happened in this room, the cost of asking questions, the response she had received from the department she now commanded. Let them see it. Let them remember it. Let them understand exactly who stood before them and what she had endured to be here. She walked to the stage, mounted the 3 steps, took her position beside Councilwoman Wells, who would administer the oath, did not look at Vance, did not acknowledge the cameras, simply stood, hands clasped before her, waiting. "Ladies and gentlemen," Councilwoman Wells's voice carried through the speaker system, "we are here today to witness the swearing-in of Morrow County's new Chief of Police. Before we proceed, I want to acknowledge the unusual circumstances surrounding this ceremony." She paused. The weight of the moment pressed down on every shoulder in the room. 2 days ago, in this very chamber, the woman before you was assaulted by an officer of the department she is about to command. She was struck in the face during a public hearing for the crime of asking questions about police accountability. The assault was witnessed by dozens of people and captured on multiple recordings. The officer responsible has been charged and removed from duty. Another pause. Cameras clicked in the silence. Chief Lockhart could have delayed this ceremony, could have stepped back, could have reconsidered her commitment to leading a department whose member attacked her. Instead, she chose to proceed, chose to demonstrate that violence against oversight does not succeed, chose to show every officer watching and every citizen watching that accountability cannot be deterred by intimidation. Wells turned to face Vivian directly. "Please raise your right hand." Vivian raised her hand. Her voice, when she spoke, carried clearly to every corner of the room. "I, Vivian Ann Lockhart, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the duties of Chief of Police of Morrow County, Georgia. I will preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Georgia. I will enforce the laws of this county and this state without fear or favor, prejudice or partiality. I will treat all persons with dignity and respect, and I will hold myself and those under my command to the highest standards of professional conduct. So help me. By the authority vested in me by the Morrow County Charter, I hereby confirm your appointment as Chief of Police. Congratulations, Chief Lockhart." Applause erupted. Not universal, not from everyone, but substantial. Genuine from some quarters, obligatory from others. A complex mixture that captured perfectly the divided response to her appointment. Vivian shook hands with the councilwoman, accepted a framed certificate of appointment, turned to face the audience. "Thank you, councilwoman. Thank you all for being here today." She let silence gather. Let the cameras capture her face, the bruise, the swelling, the absolute composure despite both. I had prepared remarks for this occasion. Remarks about my vision for the department, my commitment to community partnership, my belief in the essential dignity of law enforcement when conducted with integrity. I still believe those things. I will still pursue them. But events have intervened, and I think this moment requires something different. She stepped away from the podium, moved to the edge of the stage, closer to the audience, more personal. 48 hours ago, I sat in this room as a private citizen. I asked questions about procedures. I requested public documents. I exercised rights guaranteed to every American under the First Amendment and the Georgia Open Records Act. For this, I was threatened, intimidated, and ultimately physically attacked. Her hand rose briefly to her bruised cheek, a gesture so slight it might have been unconscious. The officer who struck me did not know who I was, did not know that in 2 days I would become his commanding officer. He struck me because he believed I was powerless, because he believed that a black woman asking uncomfortable questions could be silenced through force, because he believed, because the culture of this department taught him to believe, that civilians who challenge police conduct deserve punishment rather than answers. Movement in the front row. Vance shifting uncomfortably, other command staff exchanging glances. That officer was wrong, and the culture that created him will change. She returned to the podium. Her voice hardened slightly, not angry, but unambiguous. Effective immediately, Deputy Chief Garrett Vance is placed on administrative leave pending investigation into his conduct surrounding the events of the past week. Evidence suggests he coordinated efforts to intimidate a civilian witness, me, through official channels. That evidence will be reviewed by the District Attorney's Office and, if warranted, referred for criminal prosecution. Vance's face went white. He half rose from his seat, then sank back as security officers positioned themselves at the ends of his row. Lieutenant Derek Stowe is reassigned from internal affairs to administrative duties, effective immediately. His handling of civilian complaints will be reviewed by an independent auditor appointed by this office. Stowe, seated 2 rows behind Vance, did not react visibly, but his hands gripped the armrests of his chair hard enough to whiten his knuckles. These actions are not personal. They are not retaliatory. They are the necessary first steps in restoring accountability to a department that has lost its way. I take no pleasure in them, but I will not shrink from them. She gathered her notes, prepared to conclude. To the officers of this department who serve with integrity, and I believe that is the majority of you, I want to be clear. I am not your enemy. I am not here to punish good officers for the sins of bad ones. I am here to build a department that earns the trust of every citizen it serves. A department where misconduct is identified and addressed, not protected and concealed. A department where officers of all backgrounds can build careers based on merit rather than politics. That is my vision. That is my commitment. And I look forward to working with every officer who shares it. She stepped back from the podium. This ceremony is concluded. Department command staff will remain for a briefing. All others, thank you for attending. The room erupted into motion, reporters shouting questions, council members conferring in urgent clusters, officers filing out with expressions ranging from shock to satisfaction to barely concealed fury. Captain Osei caught Vivian's eye across the chaos. A small nod, the beginning of an alliance. Deputy Chief Vance was escorted from the chamber by security personnel. Not arrested, not yet, but removed. His access credentials would be deactivated within the hour. His office sealed pending investigation. The dominoes were falling, but the cascade had only begun. And somewhere in the evidence files, in the emails and body cam footage and witness statements accumulating in the DA's office, threads remained that Vivian had not yet pulled. Questions unanswered, connections unmapped, the full scope of institutional dysfunction still waiting to be exposed. This was not the end of the story. It was barely the beginning. The first day of her command stretched into evening. Briefings with surviving command staff, calls with the U.S. Attorney's Office, meetings with union representatives already positioning to defend their members against the coming accountability measures. A press conference that lasted 90 minutes and produced more questions than answers. By 9 p.m., Vivian sat alone in her new office, Vance's old office, hastily cleared of his personal effects, but still carrying the faint smell of his cologne. The desk was large, mahogany, old enough to have seen a dozen chiefs come and go. The chair was leather, worn smooth at the armrests by countless hours of occupation. On the desk, a laptop displaying her email inbox, already flooded with messages she had not had time to read, a stack of personnel files she had requested for review, a single photograph in a silver frame, her daughter, 8 years old, grinning at the camera from a swing set in a Philadelphia park. Her phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. You did well today, but you're not done yet. Check the 2019 Auxiliary Fund Audit, page 47. The name you're looking for will be redacted, but the pattern won't be. A friend. The same anonymous contact who had warned her about Tillman, still unidentified, still providing information she could not verify, still raising questions she did not have time to answer. She stared at the message for a long moment, then opened her laptop and began searching. The 2019 Auxiliary Fund Audit, page 47. Whatever secrets waited there, she would find them, whatever the cost. The bruise on her cheek throbbed in the lamplight, a reminder of what she had already paid, a preview of what might be coming. Outside the window, Morrow County settled into the particular darkness of small-town southern nights. Streetlights casting pools of amber across empty sidewalks, the distant sound of traffic from the highway, the occasional wail of a siren, her officers, her responsibility now, responding to calls she could not predict. Somewhere in that darkness, Brock Tillman sat in a rented room, awaiting trial, plotting revenge or resignation or both. Somewhere, Garrett Vance made phone calls to lawyers and union officials and political allies, seeking any leverage that might salvage his career. Somewhere, Derek Stowe shredded documents or deleted emails or did whatever desperate people do when walls begin closing in. And somewhere, she still did not know where, a friend watched, waited, prepared to reveal whatever truth remained hidden. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new confrontations, new opportunities to build or to fail. But tonight, for just this moment, Vivian Lockhart sat in the chair that was finally hers. Chief of Police, commander of 340 officers, responsible for the safety of 180,000 citizens. The woman who had been slapped in public was now in charge. And that was only the beginning. The 2019 Auxiliary Fund audit was buried in the municipal archives. Digital files that had been converted from paper records 3 years earlier, stored on a server that required administrative credentials to access, cataloged under a filing system designed more for obscurity than organization. It took Vivian 40 minutes to locate it, another 20 to download the complete document. 312 pages of financial records, procurement logs, and oversight memoranda. The kind of dense bureaucratic documentation that most people would never read, that auditors skimmed for red flags, that existed primarily to satisfy legal requirements rather than illuminate truth. Page 47 contained a table. Auxiliary Fund disbursements for the third quarter of 2019. Line items for equipment purchases, training expenses, community outreach programs. Standard categories. Standard amounts. Nothing obviously unusual, except one entry. Consulting services. Security assessment. $47,000. Vendor name, redacted. Authorization signature, redacted. Payment date, August 14, 2019. The redactions were unusual. Other entries on the same page showed full vendor names, full authorization signatures. Only this single line had been sanitized. Someone had decided at some point between the original audit and the digital conversion that this particular information needed to remain hidden. Vivian cross-referenced the date with department records she had access to as chief. August 2019. What had been happening in the department at that time? Her search produced an answer within minutes. August 2019 was the month Morrow County had settled its largest civil rights lawsuit to date. A traffic stop that had escalated to violence. A young black man hospitalized with a fractured orbital bone. Body camera footage that contradicted the officer's reports. Settlement amount, $1.2 million, with a confidentiality clause that prevented public disclosure of the terms. The officers involved had been Sergeant Brock Tillman and Officer Megan Harlow. Neither had faced disciplinary action. Both remained on active duty. The settlement had been paid from the city's insurance fund, and the matter had been closed without admission of wrongdoing. But now, 5 years later, a $47,000 payment to an unnamed consultant appeared in the auxiliary fund records from the same month. Authorization signature redacted. Vendor identity hidden. Vivian saved the document, made a note in her growing file, added this thread to the pattern she was assembling. The anonymous tipster had been right. There was something here, something worth finding. The question was whether she could uncover it before whoever had buried it realized she was looking. The first week of her command passed in a blur of administrative demands and institutional resistance. Department operations continued. Officers responded to calls, investigations proceeded, patrol schedules were maintained. The machinery of law enforcement ground forward regardless of who sat in the chief's office. But beneath the surface, fault lines were shifting. Captain Osei, now acting commander of internal affairs on Vivian's interim appointment, had begun a comprehensive review of all complaints closed as unfounded over the previous 3 years. The initial findings were troubling. Patterns emerged in the data that individual case files had obscured. Certain officers appeared repeatedly as subjects of complaints. Certain supervisors appeared repeatedly as investigators who closed those complaints. The same names cycling through the system, protecting each other, insulating each other from accountability. 11 complaints against Tillman in 5 years. The anonymous commenter had been accurate. 9 involved black motorists, all closed without discipline. The investigating officers included Lieutenant Stowe in 7 cases and a sergeant named Marcus Webb in the remaining 4. Webb was currently assigned to the Records Division. He had been transferred there 2 years ago after a complaint about his own conduct had been, predictably, closed as unfounded. The transfer had been characterized as administrative, not disciplinary. His personnel file contained no negative documentation, but Captain Osei's review revealed something the file did not contain. Webb had been Tillman's training officer when Tillman first joined the department 14 years ago. They had remained close, hunting trips together, attendance at each other's family events, the kind of relationship that made objective investigation impossible. "The conflict of interest is obvious," Osei said, laying the documentation on Vivian's desk. Webb should never have been assigned to investigate complaints against Tillman. It violates Section 3.4 of our own IA manual. Investigators must have no personal relationship with the subject that could compromise objectivity. And Stowe approved these assignments? Stowe made these assignments, directly. I pulled the routing records. Every Tillman complaint that came through IA, Stowe personally assigned to either himself or Webb. No rotation, no randomization. Deliberate channeling to friendly investigators. Vivian studied the documents. The pattern was clear. The evidence was strong. But evidence and accountability were not the same thing. What's Webb's current status? Administrative duties only, no investigative authority, but he still has access to record systems. If he wanted to modify or delete files, he technically could. Revoke his access. Today. Cite the ongoing review as justification. Document everything. Osei nodded, made a note, hesitated before speaking again. "Chief, there's something else. The Martinez complaint, the one from last month that the anonymous comment mentioned. I pulled the body cam footage as part of the review. And 7 minutes are missing. The footage jumps from Tillman approaching the vehicle to Tillman returning to his patrol car. Everything in between, the actual interaction with the motorist, is gone. The system logs show a gap, but no explanation for it. No documented malfunction. No technical report filed. Who has access to modify body cam archives? Officially, only IA supervisors and IT administrators. But the access controls are weak. Anyone with a department login and basic technical knowledge could probably figure out how to edit the timestamps. Vivian leaned back in her chair. The implications were serious. Missing footage suggested evidence destruction. Evidence destruction suggested something worth destroying. Something that, if seen, would have contradicted whatever story the officers had told. I want a full technical audit of the body cam system. Every modification, every access, every anomaly going back 2 years. Bring in an outside forensic specialist if necessary. I want to know exactly what happened to those 7 minutes. That will require budget approval, and it will send a message to the department that we're investigating our own systems. Good. They should know. Anyone who has something to hide should be worried. Anyone who doesn't should be relieved that we're finally taking integrity seriously. Osei gathered her files, paused at the door. "Chief, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you come to those hearings, before anyone knew who you were? You could have waited until after the ceremony, could have observed through official channels. Why take the risk?" Vivian considered the question, considered how much to reveal. Because official channels show you what institutions want you to see. I needed to see what they wanted to hide. The only way to do that was to look like someone they didn't need to impress. And Tillman gave you exactly what you needed. Tillman gave me more than I expected, but he also revealed something more important than his own misconduct. He revealed a culture, a set of assumptions about who belongs and who doesn't, about who can be threatened and who must be respected, about what happens to people who ask uncomfortable questions. She paused. That culture is what we're really fighting. Tillman is just a symptom. Osei nodded slowly, understanding dawning. It's going to get harder before it gets easier, isn't it? Much harder, but that's why we do it. If this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, take a second to hit subscribe and share it with someone who believes in accountability. The best revelations are still coming. The second week brought escalation from expected quarters. The Morrow County Police Officers Association, the union representing rank-and-file officers, filed a formal grievance against Vivian's administrative actions. The grievance alleged that Deputy Chief Vance had been placed on leave without proper procedural protections, that Lieutenant Stowe's reassignment constituted de facto discipline without due process, and that the ongoing IA review created a hostile work environment for officers who feared arbitrary punishment. The union's attorney, a silver-haired man named Franklin Moss, who had represented police officers in disciplinary matters for 30 years, requested a meeting. Vivian agreed. The meeting took place in her office on a Wednesday afternoon, with Union President Sergeant Dale Whitfield also in attendance. Moss opened with practiced smoothness. Chief Lockhart, we appreciate your willingness to meet. The association has serious concerns about recent developments, and we're hoping to find common ground. I'm always willing to listen to legitimate concerns, Mr. Moss. Please proceed. Deputy Chief Vance has served this department with distinction for 23 years. His placement on administrative leave, without specific charges, without opportunity to respond, raises significant due process questions. The association believes he deserves better. Deputy Chief Vance is under investigation for potential obstruction of justice and witness intimidation. The evidence supporting that investigation includes documented communications directing subordinates to pressure a civilian witness, me, through official channels. Administrative leave pending investigation is standard procedure in such circumstances. It protects both the integrity of the investigation and the rights of the accused. With respect, Chief, the communications you're referencing are internal policy discussions. There's nothing improper about department leadership coordinating responses to perceived threats to institutional reputation. The perceived threat was a citizen asking procedural questions at a public hearing. The coordinated response included an IA lieutenant calling that citizen to threaten formal action for harassment. If that's standard policy in this department, then the policy itself is the problem. Whitfield shifted in his seat. His expression suggested discomfort with the direction of the conversation. Chief, the men and women of this department are concerned. They feel like they're being presumed guilty. Like any complaint, no matter how frivolous, will now be treated as credible simply because of what happened to you. Sergeant, I understand that concern, and I want to address it directly. Vivian leaned forward, meeting his eyes. The review we're conducting is not about presuming guilt. It's about ensuring that our investigative processes actually work, that complaints are investigated thoroughly by investigators without conflicts of interest, with findings based on evidence rather than relationships. Officers who have done nothing wrong have nothing to fear from that kind of review. Officers who have been falsely accused will benefit from a system that reaches accurate conclusions. The only people threatened by accountability are people who have something to hide. And what about Sergeant Tillman? He's been publicly vilified before any trial. His career is destroyed regardless of the outcome. Sergeant Tillman struck a civilian in the face in front of dozens of witnesses and multiple cameras. That's not an allegation requiring investigation. That's a documented fact. His career was destroyed by his own actions, not by anyone's response to them. Moss interjected. The circumstances of that incident are more complex than the media coverage suggests. There's evidence that Ms. Locke, that you were deliberately provoking Sergeant Tillman, that the entire sequence of events was engineered to create exactly this outcome. Vivian's expression did not change, but something in the room's temperature seemed to drop. "Mr. Moss, are you suggesting that I arranged to be assaulted? That I somehow manipulated a 14-year veteran officer into losing control and striking me in public?" "I'm suggesting that the full context of the interactions leading up to that moment deserves examination. Sergeant Tillman felt threatened, felt that an outside agitator was attempting to destroy careers and reputations based on incomplete information. His reaction, while unfortunate, occurred in a highly charged emotional environment that you contributed to creating. I asked questions at a public hearing. I filed public records requests. I attended a second hearing when the first one failed to provide answers. None of those actions constitute provocation justifying physical violence. If your defense of Sergeant Tillman depends on blaming his victim for his choices, I suggest you reconsider your strategy." The meeting continued for another 40 minutes. No common ground was reached. The grievance remained pending. But Vivian had accomplished her actual objective, understanding exactly how the Union intended to fight, what arguments they would deploy, what narrative they hoped to establish. She would be ready. The forensic audit of the body cam system produced results in the third week of October. The outside specialist, a former FBI digital forensics expert named Dr. Patricia Vance, no relation to the suspended deputy chief, delivered her findings in a detailed report that ran to 47 pages. The executive summary was damning. The Morrow County Police Department's body camera archive system has significant security vulnerabilities, she wrote. Access controls are inadequate. Audit logging is incomplete. Modification of footage timestamps is possible without generating alerts. Most critically, I identified 17 instances over the past 24 months where footage gaps cannot be explained by documented technical malfunctions. 17 instances. 17 traffic stops or citizen interactions where critical moments had simply vanished from the record. Of those 17, 11 involved Sergeant Brock Tillman, Dr. Vance's technical analysis went further. She had recovered partial metadata from several deleted segments, digital fingerprints that the deletion process had failed to fully erase. The metadata included user identification codes. Those codes traced to 3 accounts, Lieutenant Derek Stowe, Sergeant Marcus Webb, and a third account registered to System Administrator with no individual assignment. The System Administrator account is particularly concerning, Dr. Vance explained in a follow-up briefing. It was created in 2018 and has been used intermittently since then, always to modify bodycam archives, never for any other purpose. The account creation logs were purged, so I cannot determine who established it. But whoever controls it has essentially unrestricted ability to alter video evidence. Can you determine who has been using it? Not definitively. The access patterns suggest multiple users, possibly rotating to avoid creating identifiable patterns. The IP addresses trace to department terminals, but those terminals are in common areas accessible to many personnel. Best guess? Dr. Vance hesitated. Based on the correlation between account activity and specific incident files, I believe the account is used by a small group, probably 3 to 5 individuals, to sanitize footage before IA review. The timing is consistent. Modification occurs within 24 to 48 hours of an incident, always before any complaint is formally filed. Someone is watching for potential problems and eliminating evidence preemptively. Vivian absorbed this. The implications were staggering. Not just individual misconduct, a coordinated system for destroying evidence of that misconduct, a conspiracy in the legal sense of the term. This needs to go to the DA immediately, and probably to the FBI. I've prepared a summary suitable for law enforcement referral. But Chief, I should warn you, this kind of finding tends to generate significant institutional resistance. People with access to evidence destruction capabilities often have other means of protecting themselves as well. I understand. Thank you, Dr. Vance. Your work has been invaluable. The referral went out that afternoon. DA Monica Tran responded within hours, requesting a meeting to discuss expanded investigation. The FBI Atlanta field office, already involved due to the Tillman assault charges, expressed interest in examining the pattern for potential federal civil rights violations. The walls were closing in, but the people inside those walls had not yet surrendered. That night, Vivian received another anonymous message. "Good work on the body cam audit, but you're looking at the wrong years. The real story starts in 2017, before Stowe ran IA, before the current system was installed. Ask who approved the vendor contract for the camera system. Ask why that vendor was selected over 3 lower bids. Ask where the difference went. A friend." She stared at the message for a long time, then began searching. The vendor contract for the body cam system was buried even deeper than the 2019 audit. Procurement records from 2017 were stored on legacy systems that had been scheduled for decommissioning but never actually taken offline. Accessing them required IT assistance, which Vivian obtained by framing the request as routine administrative review. The contract told a story. 3 vendors had submitted bids for the body camera system. The lowest bid came from a national company with extensive municipal experience, $412,000 for hardware, software, installation, and 3 years of maintenance. The middle bid came from a regional provider, $489,000. The highest bid came from a company called Secure Vision Solutions, LLC, $623,000. Morrow County had selected Secure Vision Solutions. The justification memorandum, signed by then-Captain Garrett Vance, cited superior technical capabilities and enhanced integration with existing systems. No specific technical analysis supported these claims. No evaluation committee had reviewed the bids. The decision had been made by a single individual, approved by the then Chief of Police, without documented review. Vivian dug deeper into Secure Vision Solutions. The company had been incorporated in Georgia in 2016, 1 year before the contract award. Its registered address was a virtual office service in Atlanta. Its corporate officers were listed as generic names with no apparent law enforcement connection. But the company's registered agent was a law firm that also represented the Morrow County Police Officers Association, Franklin Moss's firm. The connection could be coincidental. Law firms represented many clients. But the pattern was troubling. A company with no track record wins a major contract over established competitors. The contract is approved by a single officer who later becomes deputy chief. The company's legal representation overlaps with the police union. The camera system that results has security vulnerabilities convenient for evidence destruction. Vivian began mapping relationships, drawing lines between names and dates and dollar amounts. The picture that emerged was not yet complete. Too many gaps, too many redactions, too many questions without answers. But the outline was visible. This was not just a culture problem. This was not just individual officers making bad decisions. This was a system, built deliberately, maintained intentionally, protected aggressively, and at the center of it, names she recognized: Vance, Stowe, Tillman, Moss, and behind them, almost certainly, others she had not yet identified. The 2019 auxiliary fund payment suddenly made more sense. $47,000 to an unnamed consultant in the same month as a major civil rights settlement. Payment authorized by someone whose signature had been redacted, flowing through a fund with minimal oversight, hush money, or payoff, or both. She needed more. Needed the unredacted records. Needed to know who had received that payment and why. But getting those records would require either legal process, subpoenas, court orders, the slow machinery of formal investigation, or inside help from someone with access and willingness to share. Her anonymous tipster seemed to have both. But trusting an unknown source with unknown motives carried obvious risks. She made a decision. Replied to the anonymous message for the first time. "Who are you? Why are you helping me?" The response came 3 hours later. Someone who tried to fix this from the inside and failed. Someone who watched good officers leave because they couldn't stomach what they saw. Someone who has waited years for a chief willing to actually look. "I'll give you what I have, but not electronically. too easy to trace. Meet me Saturday, 10 a.m., Riverside Park, bench near the old mill. Come alone. If I see anyone else, I disappear and you never hear from me again. A meeting, in person, with an unidentified source who claimed to have evidence of systemic corruption. Every training protocol Vivian had ever learned screamed that this was a trap. Anonymous sources requesting secret meetings were classic setups for ambush, compromise, or worse. She had spent 20 years warning others against exactly this kind of vulnerability, but she had also spent 20 years recognizing when risks were worth taking, when the potential value of information outweighed the potential danger of obtaining it. When playing it safe meant accepting failure, she would go to the meeting, but not unprepared, and not entirely alone. Captain Osei listened to the plan without interrupting. When Vivian finished, she sat in silence for a long moment. "You're asking me to provide backup for a meeting with an unknown source, off the books, without official authorization or documentation. I'm asking you to be nearby in case something goes wrong. You won't approach unless I signal. You won't be visible. You'll simply be present. And if this is a setup, if someone is trying to create a situation where the chief of police is caught in a clandestine meeting with an unidentified informant, then having a witness protects me. Your presence documents that I went there for legitimate investigative purposes, not for anything improper." Osei considered this. Her expression remained unreadable. "Why me? You've known me for 3 weeks. You have no reason to trust me beyond what you've observed in that time." "I've observed enough. You recorded Tillman's first confrontation with me when you had no idea who I was. You provided that recording to the DA without being asked. You've been isolated in this department for years because you refuse to participate in the culture everyone else accepted. You have every reason to want accountability and no investment in protecting the people who excluded you." That's a lot of assumptions based on limited information. It is, but I've spent 20 years reading people, learning who can be trusted and who can't. My instincts aren't perfect, but they're good. And my instincts say you're someone who wants to be part of something better than what this department has been. Another long silence. Then Osei nodded. "Saturday, 10 a.m., Riverside Park. I'll be there." Saturday dawned clear and cool, the kind of October morning that reminded Georgia residents why they tolerated the brutal summers. Vivian arrived at Riverside Park at 9:30, parking in the public lot near the Nature Center, walking the trails as if she were simply enjoying a morning constitutional. The bench near the old mill was exactly where the message had described, a weathered wooden seat overlooking the creek that had once powered the mill's wheel, now reduced to a gentle trickle through rocks worn smooth by generations of water. Trees lined both banks, their leaves beginning to turn gold and red. She sat, waited, watched joggers pass, counted dog walkers, noted the position of every car in the visible parking areas. At 9:58, a figure approached from the nature trail. Average height, baseball cap pulled low, windbreaker zipped to the chin, moving with the particular gait of someone who had spent decades walking institutional hallways, a cop's walk, recognizable to anyone who had spent time around law enforcement. The figure sat on the opposite end of the bench, did not look at her, spoke without turning. "Chief Lockhart, thank you for coming." The voice was female, older, familiar somehow, though Vivian could not immediately place it. "You have information for me." "I have documentation. But first, I need to understand something. What you're doing, this investigation, these personnel actions, is it real or is it performance? Because I've seen reform promises before. I've watched 3 chiefs come in talking about accountability and leave having changed nothing. It's real. How do I know that?" Vivian considered the question, considered how to answer it honestly. "You don't. You can only judge by actions. I've placed the deputy chief on administrative leave. I've reassigned the IA commander. I've commissioned an independent forensic audit that has already produced evidence of systematic evidence tampering. I've referred findings to the DA and the FBI. Those aren't performances. Those are irreversible actions with real consequences." And when the pushback comes, when the union files lawsuits, when political allies of the people you're targeting start pressuring the council, when the media narrative shifts from reformer to witch hunter, then I keep going, because the alternative is accepting that the system cannot be changed, and I don't accept that. The figure was silent for a moment, then reached into the windbreaker and withdrew a manila envelope. This contains copies of internal communications from 2017 through 2019, emails between Vance, Stowe, and others discussing how to handle problem complaints, memoranda authorizing the body cam vendor selection with handwritten notes that didn't appear in the official file, and the unredacted version of page 47 from the 2019 Auxiliary Fund audit. Vivian took the envelope, did not open it. The name that was redacted. Who is it? Franklin Moss, the union attorney. The $47,000 was payment to his firm for consulting services, but the actual service was coordinating the legal strategy for the civil rights settlement, making sure the terms protected the officers involved, making sure no documentation survived that could be used in future cases. Moss is the union's lawyer. Representing officers in civil matters is literally his job. Representing officers is his job. Being paid through a back channel to conceal the representation is not. The auxiliary fund payment was structured specifically to avoid appearing in the union's official legal expense reports, because those reports are subject to member review, and some members might have asked questions about why the union was paying $47,000 to cover up misconduct instead of, say, improving benefits or reducing dues. Do you have proof of that, beyond the payment itself? I have Vance's handwritten note approving the payment. It says, and I quote, "Per FM, route through aux fund to avoid association disclosure requirements. FM Franklin Moss," in Vance's handwriting, on a document he thought was destroyed. Vivian absorbed this. The implications were significant. Not just corruption within the department, corruption extending to the union, to the legal apparatus that protected officers from accountability, to the financial structures that should have provided oversight. Why now? Why come forward after all these years? The figure finally turned, removed the baseball cap. Vivian recognized the face. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell, retired. Former head of the department's Professional Standards Division, the predecessor to Internal Affairs. She had left the department in 2018, officially for health reasons, actually, as Vivian now understood, because she had seen too much and been unable to stop it. "I tried to fix this when I had authority," Mitchell said. "I documented everything, built cases, prepared recommendations, and every single time, Vance or someone above him found a way to bury it, reassign the investigator, lose the evidence, pressure the complainant to withdraw. I watched it happen over and over until I couldn't watch anymore." Why not go to the DA, the FBI, outside authorities? I tried. In 2017, I brought everything I had to the FBI field office in Atlanta. They thanked me for my concern, said they would look into it. Nothing happened. 6 months later, I was told my position was being eliminated as part of departmental restructuring. I could accept early retirement with full benefits or face termination for cause based on performance issues that had suddenly appeared in my file. You were forced out. I was silenced. The system protected itself. The people I had tried to expose stayed in power, and the officers who came after me, good officers, officers who wanted to do the right thing, learned the lesson. Keep your head down. Don't ask questions. Don't challenge the way things work. Mitchell's voice cracked slightly. 20 years of suppressed frustration finally finding an outlet. "Captain Osei, she's one of the good ones. She saw what I saw, tried what I tried, got the same results, but she stayed. Found a way to survive inside the system while waiting for this, for someone willing to actually fight. She never mentioned you. She doesn't know I'm the one who's been sending you information. I've kept my identity hidden even from allies. Too many years of watching people get destroyed for knowing the wrong things." Vivian looked at the envelope in her hands. Documentation that could bring down not just individuals, but systems. Evidence that could transform suspicion into prosecution. Why trust me? You don't know me. I could be just like the others. I could take this and bury it the way everyone else has." Mitchell smiled, a tired, knowing smile. "Because I watched you. For 2 weeks before you came to that first hearing, I watched you. The way you talked to the clerk at the records office, the way you treated the maintenance staff, the way you ordered coffee at the diner across from the municipal building. Small things, invisible things, but they told me who you are. And who am I? Someone who treats people like people, regardless of whether they can help you or hurt you, regardless of what you might gain or lose. That's rarer than you think, especially in this job." She stood, adjusted her cap, prepared to disappear back into whatever anonymous existence she had built since leaving the department. "One more thing," Vivian said. "The anonymous email from 2019, the one that went to the FBI before your complaint. Was that you too?" "No, someone else. Someone still inside, I think. I've never been able to identify them, but they've been watching for even longer than I have. If you find out who it is, let me know. I'd like to thank them." She walked away without looking back. Vivian remained on the bench, envelope in her hands, processing everything she had just learned. 300 feet away, concealed in a maintenance shed, Captain Osei lowered her binoculars and exhaled. This is the part of the story where everything starts coming together. If you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. The revelations in the next few minutes will change everything. The documents in the envelope confirmed what Vivian had suspected and revealed much she had not. The handwritten note from Vance was damning. Explicit direction to route payment through auxiliary funds to avoid disclosure. Franklin Moss's initials visible in the margin. A paper trail that connected the union's legal defense strategy to deliberate financial obfuscation. But there was more. Emails between Stowe and Vance discussing specific complaints. Not in the sanitized language of official memoranda. In the casual brutality of colleagues who trusted each other completely. One email, dated March 2018, stood out. "The Williams complaint is going to be a problem. Kid has medical records, witness statements, the whole package. We need to make this go away before it reaches formal review. Talk to your friend about options." Your friend. Unnamed, unidentified, but clearly someone with the ability to make complaints disappear. Vivian cross-referenced dates. The Williams complaint. She recognized that name. Jordan Williams. The excessive force case that had prompted the public hearings in September. The case where Sergeant Tillman was the subject. March 2018. The complaint had been filed. Stowe had identified it as problematic. And somehow it had been closed as unfounded. Until Jordan Williams had hired a private attorney and pushed for independent review, forcing the matter back into public attention years later. The email chain continued. Stowe reporting back 2 weeks later. Handled. Medical records recharacterized as pre-existing condition. Witnesses declined to provide formal statements after conversation with patrol. Kid's family can't afford attorney. Case closed. Witnesses declined to provide formal statements after conversation with patrol. Vivian read that line 3 times. The implications were clear. Someone had visited the witnesses. Someone had persuaded them not to cooperate. The language was careful, plausible deniability if anyone ever read the emails, but the meaning was unmistakable. Witness intimidation, coordinated from within internal affairs, documented in writing. This was not a civil matter anymore. This was criminal, multiple felonies, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, civil rights violations. She called DA Tran that afternoon. The meeting that followed lasted 3 hours. When it ended, the investigation had expanded significantly. The FBI would take lead on the federal civil rights charges. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation would handle state-level obstruction and conspiracy charges. DA Tran would coordinate, ensuring no jurisdictional gaps allowed anyone to escape accountability. Search warrants were being prepared. Arrest warrants would follow once sufficient evidence had been secured through legal process. The dominoes were about to fall. All of them. November brought the first public revelations. The Morrow County Register, working with documentation provided through proper channels by the DA's office, published a front-page investigation titled "Years of Buried Complaints: Inside the Morrow County Police Department's Pattern of Cover-Up." The story detailed the body cam audit findings, the financial irregularities, the connections between department leadership and the union legal fund. Franklin Moss was named specifically. His firm issued a statement denying any wrongdoing, characterizing the auxiliary fund payment as routine legal services properly documented and disclosed according to applicable requirements. The statement was technically true. The payment had been documented. The documentation had simply been designed to conceal rather than reveal. Deputy Chief Garrett Vance, still on administrative leave, declined to comment through his personal attorney. But the attorney filed a motion seeking to have the investigation transferred to an outside agency, arguing that Chief Lockhart's personal involvement in the precipitating incident created an insurmountable conflict of interest. The motion was denied. The judge, a federal magistrate overseeing the civil rights aspects of the case, noted that Chief Lockhart had appropriately recused herself from direct involvement in the investigation, that independent agencies were leading the inquiry, and that the suggestion of bias was undermined by the volume of documentary evidence supporting the allegations. Sergeant Brock Tillman's criminal trial was scheduled for March. His attorney had filed multiple motions to suppress evidence, exclude witnesses, and change venue. All had been denied. The assault charge under Georgia Code Section 16-523 was proceeding. The federal charge under 18 U.S.C. Section 242 had been added, expanding potential penalties significantly. Officer Megan Harlow, named in several of the newly public documents as a participant in complaint management discussions, resigned from the department rather than face formal disciplinary proceedings. Her resignation letter cited hostile work environment and politically motivated persecution. It was accepted without ceremony. Lieutenant Stowe was arrested on November 14th. The charges included obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. His bail was set at $75,000. He posted bond and returned home to await trial. Sergeant Marcus Webb was arrested the same day. Similar charges, similar bail. Same law firm representing him, Franklin Moss's firm, despite the obvious conflicts of interest. The union filed an emergency grievance alleging that the arrests constituted retaliation for protected union activity. The grievance was rejected by the city's Labor Relations Board within 48 hours. And through it all, the investigation continued, expanding, deepening, finding new threads to pull, new connections to explore, new evidence of systematic corruption that had flourished for years under the protection of institutional indifference. The DOJ Civil Rights Division formally opened a pattern or practice investigation into the Morrow County Police Department on November 22nd. The announcement came from Washington. The investigation would examine whether the department had engaged in a pattern of civil rights violations requiring federal intervention. If the investigation found such a pattern, the consequences could be severe. A consent decree placing the department under federal oversight, mandatory reforms monitored by court-appointed supervisors, potential dissolution and reconstitution of leadership structures. Vivian had seen consent decrees before, had watched them transform and sometimes destroy police departments across the country. The process was painful, expensive, humiliating, and sometimes necessary. She hoped it would not come to that. Hoped that the changes she was implementing would prove sufficient to satisfy federal concerns. But she would not resist the process if it came, would not defend institutional pride at the cost of institutional reform. The department had been sick for a long time. Whatever medicine it needed, she would administer. Thanksgiving passed quietly. Vivian spent it with her daughter, finally able to relocate from Philadelphia now that the initial chaos of the new position had settled. They ate turkey and watched football and talked about school and friends and all the normal things that normal families discussed on normal holidays. Her daughter did not ask about the investigation, did not mention the news coverage or the controversy or the bruise that had finally faded from her mother's cheek. She was 8 years old. She knew her mother was a police chief. She did not need to know the rest. That night, after her daughter was asleep, Vivian sat in her home office and reviewed the latest case updates. Testimony scheduled, depositions completed. Documentary evidence organized and cataloged. The picture that emerged was comprehensive, damning, irrefutable. Garrett Vance had orchestrated a system of complaint suppression for nearly a decade. He had used his positions, first as captain, then as deputy chief, to ensure that officers loyal to him faced no consequences for misconduct. He had diverted department funds to conceal the true costs of that protection. He had coordinated with the union attorney to create legal and financial structures that shielded everyone involved. Derek Stowe had implemented the system at the operational level, assigning friendly investigators to sensitive complaints, modifying body cam footage to eliminate inconvenient evidence, pressuring witnesses into silence, closing cases that should have resulted in termination or prosecution. Brock Tillman had been the system's most prolific beneficiary. 11 complaints in 5 years, 9 involving black motorists, all closed unfounded. His pattern of conduct, racial profiling, excessive force, intimidation, had been documented again and again by victims who had nowhere to turn because the department's internal accountability mechanisms had been captured by his protectors. And beneath all of it, the question that still nagged at Vivian: who else was involved? The anonymous source, the one Mitchell had mentioned, the one still inside the department, remained unidentified. The friend who had guided Vivian toward the crucial evidence had not contacted her again since their meeting in the park. Someone was still out there. Someone who knew more than they had shared. Someone waiting for what? December brought answers and new questions. The call came on a Tuesday evening. Vivian was reviewing budget documents, the mundane administrative work that consumed most of her actual time as chief, when her personal cell phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. "Lockhart." "Chief, we need to talk." A male voice, familiar, somehow. "I know who's been helping you. I know what they've given you, and I know what they haven't." "Who is this?" "Someone who's been watching this department for a very long time. Someone who's been waiting for someone like you. Can you meet tonight? Same place Mitchell took you, 10 p.m. Vivian's instincts flared. Another anonymous meeting. Another potential trap. But the reference to Mitchell was specific. Only someone with inside knowledge would know about that meeting. "Why should I trust you?" "Because I'm the one who sent the FBI tip in 2019. The one Mitchell couldn't identify. The one who's been feeding information to everyone willing to listen for almost a decade. I've never met with anyone directly before, but the situation has changed. There's something you need to know before the arrests continue, something that will change everything. Tell me now, over the phone." "Not possible. What I need to show you requires visual verification, documents that can't be transmitted electronically, evidence that I've protected for years because the moment it becomes digital, it becomes vulnerable." A long pause. Vivian weighed the risks, the potential value, the possibility that this was genuine versus the possibility that it was a setup designed to discredit her at a crucial moment. "I'll be there, but I'm bringing backup again." "I know, Osei, she's good. Bring her. You'll want a witness for this anyway." The line went dead. Riverside Park at night was different from Riverside Park in morning light. Shadows pooled beneath the trees. The creek's gentle murmur seemed louder in the darkness. The bench near the old mill was barely visible, illuminated only by distant parking lot lights filtering through branches. Vivian sat. Osei positioned herself 50 yards away, concealed but alert. At 10:07 p.m., footsteps approached. A figure emerged from the tree line. Male. Tall. Moving with the same institutional gait that Mitchell had displayed. He sat. Did not remove any concealing clothing. His face remained in shadow. "Chief Lockhart, thank you for coming. You said you had something to show me." "I do." He reached into a messenger bag, withdrew a thick folder, placed it on the bench between them. "This is everything, the complete picture, not just Vance and Stowe, everyone." Vivian did not reach for the folder. "Who are you?" "My name is Tyler Morrison. I was a detective in this department for 18 years. I left in 2016, officially for personal reasons, actually because I couldn't stand what I was seeing anymore. Since then, I've been collecting evidence, documenting patterns, waiting for an opportunity to make it matter." "Why not come forward earlier? Take it to the FBI, the DA, the media?" "I tried, in 2019, the FBI tip that Mitchell mentioned. I sent them everything I had at that point. Detailed documentation of complaint suppression, evidence tampering, financial irregularities. They investigated, for 3 months, then closed the inquiry citing insufficient evidence of prosecutable conduct." What happened? What always happens. Someone inside the Bureau had connections to someone inside the department. Word got back. Evidence disappeared. Witnesses changed their stories. By the time the investigation closed, half of what I had submitted had been lost or misfiled. The system protected itself. Vivian absorbed this. It matched what Mitchell had told her. 2 separate attempts to expose the same corruption, both blocked by the same institutional immune response. What's different now? You're different. You came from outside. You have no connections to the people who've been running protection. And you got hit. He gestured vaguely toward her face, where the bruise had long since healed. That changed the equation, made it impossible to bury, made it a story that couldn't be ignored. So you've been feeding me information to build on that momentum. I've been giving you breadcrumbs, leading you toward what you needed to find, but always at a distance, always through channels that couldn't be traced back to me. Because I learned something important in 2019, being identified as a source makes you a target, and targets get neutralized. He pushed the folder closer to her. This is everything else. The pieces I couldn't risk transmitting electronically. The evidence that names the people at the top of the food chain, not just Vance, not just Moss, the people who made it all possible. Vivian opened the folder, began reviewing the contents by the dim light of her phone's screen. What she found made her breath catch. The first document was a copy of an email, dated 2015, sent from an account registered to the Morrow County City Manager's Office, addressed to Garrett Vance, then a captain. Subject line, Complaint Management Protocol. The email outlined, in explicit detail, a system for minimizing departmental liability exposure through proactive complaint resolution. The language was bureaucratic, sanitized, but the meaning was clear. City leadership had directed the department to suppress complaints to avoid lawsuits, had provided guidance on how to do so without creating documentary evidence, had established the framework that Vance and Stowe would later implement. The city manager who had sent that email was still in office, still overseeing municipal operations, still signing off on the budget that funded the police department. You're saying this goes to the top of city government. I'm saying the department couldn't have operated this way for this long without protection from above. Vance didn't create the system. He implemented a system that his bosses designed. And those bosses are still in place, still protected by the same structures they built. Vivian continued through the folder. More emails, more memoranda, a web of complicity that extended far beyond the police department into the city manager's office, the city attorney's office, even, according to one document, into the office of a county commissioner who had since been elected to the state legislature. This was not just a police corruption case anymore. This was a municipal corruption case, a political corruption case, a case that could bring down not just individuals, but institutions. Why give this to me now? Why not wait for the federal investigation to run its course? Because the federal investigation is focused on the police department, on the civil rights violations, on the pattern of conduct within law enforcement. They're not looking at City Hall. They're not looking at the political connections. And if someone doesn't start looking soon, the people who built this system will sacrifice the people who implemented it and walk away clean. Vance and Stowe become the fall guys. Exactly. Take the hit, do some time, get pardoned or paroled after a few years. Meanwhile, the people who authorized everything they did remain in power, ready to build the same system again with new faces. Vivian closed the folder, the weight of what she held, literally and figuratively, pressed down on her shoulders. I need to verify this, independently, before taking any action. Of course. That's why I gave you paper originals rather than digital copies, harder to forge, harder to dismiss as fabrications. Take them to your forensic document expert, confirm the paper stock, the ink composition, the timeline consistency. Everything will check out. And if it does, then you have a choice. You can limit the investigation to the department, let the federal process play out, accept the partial justice that results. Or you can expand the scope. Take on City Hall. Take on the political establishment. Risk everything you've built in the past 3 months for the chance to root out corruption that's been growing for decades. He stood, prepared to disappear back into the darkness. One more question, Vivian said. He paused. Why do you care? You left. You could have walked away, started over somewhere else, forgotten all of this. Morrison was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried something that sounded almost like grief. Because I spent 18 years believing in this department, believing that the badge meant something, that we were the good guys, and watching that belief get destroyed piece by piece until I couldn't recognize myself anymore. He exhaled. I care because someone has to. Because if people like me don't fight for what law enforcement is supposed to be, there won't be anything left worth saving. He walked away. The darkness swallowed him. Vivian remained on the bench, folder in her lap, staring at the creek's black water. Osi approached when enough time had passed to ensure Morrison was gone. Who was that? Someone who's been waiting a long time for this moment. Vivian stood. And someone who just made our job a lot more complicated. The federal trial of Sergeant Brock Tillman began in March, as scheduled. The proceedings took place in the United States District Court for the Northern District of Georgia, before Judge Harrison Wells, a Carter appointee known for his meticulous attention to procedure and his intolerance for prosecutorial overreach. The government's case was strong, video evidence from multiple angles showing the assault, testimony from witnesses present in the hearing chamber, expert analysis confirming that Tillman's conduct met the legal standard for deprivation of rights under color of law. The defense's strategy, as expected, focused on provocation. Tillman's attorney argued that his client had been subjected to sustained harassment by a woman later revealed to be his incoming commanding officer. Harassment designed to create exactly the reaction that occurred. The assault, while regrettable, was the product of deliberate manipulation rather than criminal intent. The jury did not buy it. After 3 days of deliberation, they returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. Tillman was convicted of deprivation of rights under color of law under 18 U.S.C. Section 242 and simple battery under Georgia Code Section 16-523. Sentencing was scheduled for May. The federal charge carried a potential sentence of 1 to 10 years. The state charge added up to 12 months. Judge Wells, in comments from the bench, indicated that he would consider the full range of factors in determining appropriate punishment, including Tillman's 14 years of service, but also the egregious nature of the conduct and the breach of public trust it represented. Tillman was remanded to custody pending sentencing. His badge and credentials had long since been surrendered. His career was over. His freedom would soon follow. One domino down. Many more to go. The state trials of Stowe and Webb proceeded through spring and into summer. Both defendants had rejected plea offers, betting on jury nullification or procedural errors that might provide grounds for appeal. Both bets lost. Stowe was convicted in April of obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. His sentence, 8 years federal, 3 years state, to run consecutively. He would be eligible for parole in 7 years with good behavior. Webb was convicted in June of similar charges, with somewhat lighter sentences reflecting his lesser role in the conspiracy. 5 years federal, 2 years state. Parole eligibility in 4 years. Both men were transferred to federal custody. Both were immediately segregated from the general population. Former law enforcement officers faced particular dangers in prison environments, and, whatever their crimes, they did not deserve to be murdered for them. Deputy Chief Garrett Vance accepted a plea agreement in July. The deal had been negotiated over months of intensive discussion between his attorneys and the federal prosecutors. In exchange for his cooperation, testimony against others involved in the conspiracy, detailed documentation of how the system had operated, identification of political connections that the investigation had not yet uncovered, he would receive a reduced sentence, 12 years, eligible for parole in 8. Better than the 20+ he would have faced at trial, but still a substantial portion of his remaining life. The cooperation requirement was the key. Vance had names, dates, documents, evidence that could extend the investigation far beyond the police department, into City Hall, into the county commission, into the political machinery that had enabled and protected corruption for decades. His testimony, delivered over 3 days of closed-door sessions with federal investigators, implicated 7 additional individuals: the city manager, who had authored the 2015 email, 2 assistant city attorneys who had structured the legal frameworks for complaint suppression, a county commissioner who had used his influence to block state-level oversight inquiries, and 3 private citizens who had served as intermediaries for financial transactions designed to conceal the true costs of the system. Franklin Moss was among the 3 private citizens named. The Union attorney's arrest in August was the most dramatic of the sequence. Federal marshals took him into custody at his law firm's downtown office, in front of staff and clients with cameras rolling, a deliberate choice by prosecutors to send a message about the scope of the investigation. Moss was charged with conspiracy to obstruct justice, wire fraud, and money laundering. The allegations centered on his role in structuring the auxiliary fund payments, concealing the true nature of legal services provided to the department, and facilitating the flow of money designed to protect officers from accountability. His bail was set at $500,000. He posted bond and began preparing his defense. But the damage was done. The union's relationship with its legal counsel was severed. Members began asking questions about where their dues had gone. The association's leadership faced a revolt from rank-and-file officers who had known nothing about the corruption occurring in their name. The institution was eating itself, and Vivian watched it happen with the particular satisfaction of someone who had spent her career understanding that sustainable reform required not just removing bad actors, but destroying the structures that created them. By October, 1 year after the assault that had started everything, the investigation had produced 17 indictments, 14 convictions, and 3 pending trials. The city manager had resigned rather than face prosecution, accepting a deal that included permanent disbarment from public service. 2 county commissioners had been removed from office through recall elections triggered by the revelations. The state legislature had opened its own investigation into whether additional political figures had been involved. The DOJ pattern or practice investigation concluded with the finding that the Morrow County Police Department had indeed engaged in systematic civil rights violations requiring federal intervention. A consent decree was negotiated over 3 months of intensive discussions. The terms included mandatory reforms to complaint handling, evidence management, use of force policies, and hiring practices. An independent monitor would oversee implementation for a minimum of 5 years. It was not victory. Not complete victory. The system had been exposed, disrupted, partially dismantled, but the deeper roots remained. Political corruption that extended beyond what any single investigation could address. Cultural patterns that would take generations to fully transform. The particular inertia of institutions that had operated a certain way for so long that no one remembered any other way. But it was progress. Real, measurable, irreversible progress. Officers who had abused their authority were in prison. Leaders who had enabled that abuse had been removed. Structures that had protected corruption had been reformed. And at the center of it all, a woman who had been slapped in public for asking questions sat in the chief's office, still asking questions, still demanding answers, still believing that the system could be better than it was. That was worth something. That was worth everything. The final piece fell into place on a quiet Thursday in November, 13 months after Vivian had first walked into the municipal building hearing chamber as an anonymous observer. She received an envelope, hand-delivered, no return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper with a typed message. The 2019 Auxiliary Fund Audit, page 47. You found the payment. You found the connection. But you never asked the right question. Who authorized the redaction? Not Vance. He didn't have access to the audit files after they were submitted to the state comptroller. Someone else. Someone with authority over municipal records. Someone who knew what was being hidden and chose to help hide it. Look at the comptroller's office. Look at who reviewed the audit before submission. Look at the signature on the certification page. Then look at who that person is married to. A friend who's been watching since the beginning. Vivian read the message 3 times, then began searching. The state comptroller's office had reviewed the 2019 Auxiliary Fund Audit as part of routine municipal oversight. The reviewing official, the person who had certified the audit as complete and accurate before filing, was a senior analyst named Patricia Dalton. Patricia Dalton was married to a man named Raymond Dalton. Raymond Dalton was the chief of staff for the governor of Georgia. The implications were staggering. The corruption did not stop at the county level, did not stop at the city level, extended into the state capitol, into the governor's inner circle, into the heart of Georgia's political establishment. Vivian sat with this knowledge for a long time, considered what to do with it, considered the risks of pursuing it, considered the risks of not pursuing it. She picked up her phone, dialed a number she had memorized but never called. FBI Director's Office. How may I direct your call? This is Chief Vivian Lockhart, Morrow County Police Department. I need to speak with the director personally. Tell him it's about extending the investigation. Tell him we're not done yet. She waited. The hold music played. The future hung in the balance. And somewhere in Atlanta, in Washington, in the halls of power that had protected corruption for decades, people who thought they were safe began to feel the first cold tremors of accountability approaching. The story was not over. It would never be over. Justice was not a destination, but a process. Slow, incomplete, exhausting, essential. Each victory created new battles. Each exposure revealed new depths of complicity. Each reform generated new resistance. But that was the work. That was the calling. That was what it meant to believe that systems could be better, that people could be better, that the gap between what law enforcement was and what it should be could be narrowed through persistence and courage, and the stubborn refusal to accept that things could not change. Vivian Lockhart had been slapped in public for asking questions. 13 months later, she was still asking questions. And she would keep asking until the answers finally matched the ideals. That was not everything, but it was not nothing either. The director came on the line. She began to speak, and the next chapter opened.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. If you found the content helpful, please remember to like and subscribe so you won't miss our upcoming episodes. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave a comment below. We are always here to listen.